You'll be able to tell your car, like, take me home, go here, go there, anything, and it'll just do it at an order of magnitude safer than a person. And in fact, in the distant future, I think it's probably going to be, if people may outlaw driving cars because it's too dangerous. Like, you can't have a person driving a 2-ton death machine.
What are the values that we're going to embed in the cars if in fact we're going to get all the benefits of self-driving cars, and how do we make the public comfortable with it?
You get a self-driving car, you get a self-driving car, you get a self-driving car!
The deepest questions, the darkest intuitions. This is the Moral Trigger.
You know that every single time you get into a car that you are risking death, but you still do it, and so will I. In America alone, 30,000 people plus die every single year, and according to the National Safety Council, the only things more likely to kill you in America is heart disease, respiratory disease, poisoning, and self-inflicted harm. They say that if the odds of dying from all possible causes are 1 in 1, the odds of dying in a car accident is 1 in 113 compared to plane crashes, which is 1 in 10,000. That is a huge difference. Yet, if you ask the average person what they're more afraid of, I'm pretty sure you know which one they would say. Across the world, there are 1.2 million deaths per year. That's 3,287 per day, and roughly 1,000 of them are under 25. Besides deaths, there's an estimated 20 to 50 million injuries and disabilities due to accidents. In the US alone, roughly 1,600 kids under the age of 15 will die every year, and 8,000 of them die between the ages of 16 and 20. That is a lot of deaths, and the worst part is that 94% of them are due to human error, and this amounts to $230.6 billion spent due to crashes. Now, all of those numbers come from the Association for the Safe International Road Travel, but they also cross-reference quite well with the World Health Organization data. And as always, I will provide links. According to the director of the National Economic Council, we spend roughly $160 billion on gas and time lost due to traffic. Now, I'm not entirely sure how they arrived at that number, but let's even say it's half of that. That is a ton of money that could obviously be spent on something else. A lot like how elevators used to require operators, but they're now ran much more safely and efficiently by computers, this is likely the trend we will follow with vehicles. But should we? You have to remember that computers cannot get really drunk and think they're safe to drive 10 miles from home on a rainy night. Computers don't text and drive. They also just really don't get distracted in any way at all. I mean, they never get tired. They will never yell at kids and put makeup on at the same time like my highly multitasked mother was able to do. According to electrical engineer Ryan Lube, due to the fact that axon neuron electrical transmission depends on the chemical and biological environment it is in, data transmission of one neuron is actually millions of times slower than the fastest electrical transmission rates over copper electrical wire, and even slower compared to fiber optics. If you didn't catch the gist of that, it just means that computers send and receive signals way faster than our brains can. So the question is, does that correlate to how safe the computers in the future self-driving cars will be? The University of Michigan's Transportation Research Institute wanted to test that, and so they did a study that found that self-driving cars had a higher crash rate than human-driven cars. But here's the main thing. Most of the crashes were people crashing into the self-driving cars, not the fault of the computers. From that study, people are concluding that computers were safer, just humans had a hard time adjusting to the robots being on the road, which is obviously just going to take some time. Transitioning into a world with self-driving cars has many people worried. According to a recent poll by J.D. Power, it was just published April 2017, on their site they posted the study, and in one of the articles they said that, quote, in most cases as technology concepts get closer to becoming reality, consumer curiosity and acceptance increase. And this was from Kristen Kolaj, the executive director of driver interaction and HMI research at J.D. Power. She went on to say that, quote, with autonomous vehicles, we see a pattern where trust drives interest in the technology. And right now, the level of trust is declining. Along with collision mitigation, there are many benefits to autonomous vehicles, including allowing those who are unable to drive in today's vehicles to experience the freedom of mobility. Interestingly, though, 40% of boomers do not see any benefit to self-driving cars. Automated driving is a new and complex concept for many customers. They'll just have to experience it firsthand to fully understand it, end quote. They also noted that there was a generation gap between who was worried and who wasn't. I had asked a few of you what you thought about transitioning into this world. Let's check out what you guys had to say.
When I first saw your question, my answer was absolutely yes. However, after researching both sides of the debate, I would have to say that while I support the eventual and inevitable transition, in the short term, the next 10-15 years, I really can only support computer-assisted cars. As stated in an article I found by MIT professor David Mindell, from spacecraft to underwater exploration to air travel, the most state-of-the-art products still have a driver or pilot somewhere in the network. I believe that progress in automated systems in the real world shouldn't be measured against the standard of complete automation, but rather towards trusted, transparent, reliable, and safe autonomy that is fully interactive. So the car does exactly what I want to do, and only when I want it to do it. Gives you better control. Here in Ohio, our government has already approved the use of self-driving vehicles on our turnpikes, and I do support this given the restrictions that our state legislature has seen fit to put forth on this technology.
Personally, I would feel much safer being on the road with self-driving cars, since the majority of car accidents are due to human error. I think that the majority of trepidation that people have with the idea of self-driving cars stems from either a lack of being in control of the vehicle and feeling as if they would react better in situations than the car itself would, or the idea that the car, if it given a choice, could possibly choose the life of a pedestrian or another car over the life of the person or people in the self-driving vehicle. So while it could be the more logical choice, it could be a choice that would cause them harm. Myself, I see it as a safer and more logical alternative, and I would feel much better if we moved to self-driving cars. I think that the only caveat to that should be, however, that there are certain rules and regulations with those, namely regarding upkeep would be a point to consider. With cars as they are currently, it could be unsafe to have a car on the road that is not performing the way that it should be, with a car that essentially is making decisions and is self-driving. It could be much more dangerous to have a car like this doing things on its own if it's not being kept properly. So as long as we consider different things like that, I think that there's no issue with self-driving cars.
I think we're going to transition to self-driving cars, regardless of how I feel about it. I just think that the wow factor, and it's kind of the future. I think that people want it, and I think they're blown away by it, and I think it will become commonplace. I mean, we've already got, Tesla, we've got Google doing their thing, so I think it's going to happen. I do think it is probably a little safer as far as, you just don't have people, checking Facebook, you don't have people eating, putting on makeup, whatever, while they're driving, so it does take a little bit of that randomness, that human factor out of it. Honestly, I'm okay with it. Would I feel safer driving in one? I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. I think if everybody had a driverless car, I would be fine with it. I don't know how that car is going to react to that human error, to that guy that just cut across in front of me. I mean, you want to say that it's going to react great, but I don't know. That worries me. I'd like to quickly add that one reason why I am hesitant to buy a driverless car or to ride in one is because once the government decides, oh, you know what? We don't like you anymore, or you're an enemy of the state, or you're a terrorist, or they label you something, they can make that car shut down, locked at doors, they can make it drive to a police station, they can take that car over. So is that a little bit of conspiracy theory and a little bit of paranoia and slippery slope? Absolutely. But I always look at technology I'm always blown away by it, and I love technology and I love what it can do. But I always ask, how can this be misused?
An interesting thing right now is that the government doesn't really know what to do about regulating these cars. Many of the software updates that companies like Tesla are doing just coincide with the current laws regarding accessories like automatic doors and smart cars with Wi-Fi and just other luxury items. But in September 2016, the government finally released the first rulebook regarding the self-driving cars. And in it is a 15-point safety assessment, but critics are arguing that it's very vague. And another big issue, if you ask the companies who are producing the cars, is that the government is making them share data out of, quote, safety concerns. But the question is, will they oblige? Because there are a lot of loopholes. And just think about how that does remove a little bit of the competition. Would you want to share all of your secrets with your competitors? But there's also a risk of not meeting the expectations of the public. Because in the end, we're the ones buying the cars, so they do have to meet our standards. And since 2012, 34 states and Washington, D.C. have considered legislation regarding the self-driving cars, but the main states leading the charge are California, Michigan, Virginia, and Florida. In my research, I was able to find some bills in Alabama, Hawaii, and Minnesota, but they all failed. Former President Obama had a really interesting interview with Wired about this topic. He had many positive things to say about the technology, including that it would drastically reduce fatalities and drastically improve traffic efficiency. He approved a $4 billion allocation over 10 years to support research, and according to former Secretary of Transportation Anthony Fox, the bill is meant to, quote, accelerate the development and adoption of safe vehicle automation through real-world pilot projects. Obama also said that he thinks the government should stay involved with basic research and just overall making sure that the cars have the okay with the public and the okay of the best possible safety experts. He stressed that we in the public are going to have to vote on this, and in the end, it's us that are the ones who are going to decide if we want this or not. Now, critics have said that none of this really matters because Trump is in office now, and once the bill was added to the previous budget, Trump could just scrap this, but Trump has made moves that seem to favor innovation and technology, so I really don't think he's going to gut this. Think about how he's been in contact with Elon Musk and Bill Gates specifically about innovation and technology. The most interesting part of this interview, in my opinion, was where Obama talks about what makes us human is our kinks. He thinks that perfection is static, but we are dynamic. This brings us to the messy ethics of self-driving cars because our, quote, kinks cause 7-figure deaths every single year. Computers do not have the impulsive reactions that humans do, but sometimes these impulsive reactions lead to good outcomes. Sure, we make mistakes, but many of us do try to be good people when we're put in rough situations. It's been proven, though, that at specific tasks, computers are just better than us. A computer will beat you at chess every single time. They will beat you at math every single time. They can store things so much better than we can. Just think of all the things that our smartphones do that we just can't do or just can't do very well. But when humans are put in tough situations, many times we do things that are otherwise wrong but do lead to good outcomes. Patrick Lynn, who's an associate professor of philosophy at California Polytechnic State University, he was writing in The Atlantic and he said that, quote, sometimes good judgment can compel us to act illegally, like driving fast during emergencies. Should a self-driving car get to make that same decision? So I assume that if the government is involved in regulating the rules and guidelines, this means that the cars will follow all traffic laws. I mean, let's hope, right? But what about in cases when, say, your wife's about to give birth unexpectedly, you're speeding, you get pulled over? Many cops will just turn their lights on and help you get to the hospital safely instead of giving you a ticket. I think in the distant future we could synchronize our vehicles to send signals during an emergency that lets other cars know, but we can't really just count on that right now because that's going to take some time. Now, Google wants to make self-driving cars without steering wheels or pedals. This essentially removes the human aspect entirely. That would also mean that a human could not take control in the case of emergency, and a few companies have been trying to counter that by having the technology basically look into your eyes and know when you're paying attention or not. It's a little creepy, but I guess that's one way to solve the issue. Nissan just recently announced that they will be using NASA-sourced technology that uses artificial intelligence to drive. The technology came from a system that NASA uses to manage interplanetary robots. The CEO said that the computer knows when it cannot fully comprehend a situation and then uses radar to communicate with the human in order to send instructions on what to do when it cannot figure out the situation. We can certainly imagine some scenarios where our cars could be put into some morally tough situations. How do you think they should react? So I gave you guys a few situations to react on. The first one was the car's brakes go out and it's heading towards a group of children crossing the street. Should the car swerve to hit a building, thus killing the passenger to save the children, or should the car prioritize the lives of the passengers? Another story to pump in intuition was if the car has a choice to either hit a child or hit an elderly couple, what should it do? So let's check out your responses.
Like I said before, in the short term, I do support computer-assisted vehicles where there's still a licensed driver responsible for the safety of themselves and others, albeit with added technology that will most definitely help to reduce accidents. Now, companies such as Google want completely automated vehicles, which means that the company would accept any liability for the accidents that may occur. And as much as you feel like putting a moral compass on it, in a situation where an accident is inevitable and the manufacturer is liable, they will put an algorithm in place that will see them end up with the least amount of financial dues possible. Like it or not, financial concerns will always trump morality. If this technology is rushed into being too quickly, Google, with its endless databases, including financial information and facial recognition programs, might be able to program its vehicles to hit the less wealthy first so that it faces less expensive lawyers, thus limiting the amount of financial repercussions they may face. I feel that states should also have their own say in the issue and think that designating certain express lanes for perhaps just fully automated vehicles or vehicles on autopilot and maybe other consenting drivers would be a great first step so that automated vehicles can gain great real-world experience. Technology will never be more moralistically impartial than the individuals who have programmed it, so we need to exercise great caution in this area. I think the better question is if this power should ever be given solely to corporations, or if it should continue to lie with a licensed driver behind the wheel of a vehicle at all times.
I think that in a situation where there's life or death involved, if it were possible, the car should make the most logical choice. That logical choice being that it should spare the most people it possibly can. If that means that you're driving and your car currently has 6 people in a van or an SUV and you're potentially going to harm the life of one person, that car should opt for the option that spares the people in the vehicle because it would spare the most human lives. Now, asked to consider in the question, there are situations like an elderly person versus a child where that situation is not so much number of lives as it is a different sort of moral dilemma. I don't think the car would have a way to determine, age. So is it possible that it could make a determination based upon age? Maybe not. I think that if it could, I think that the car should opt to spare the person who has the most life left. So while I don't necessarily know if that technology is possible, I think that it should spare the life of a child over an elderly person. I also think that if it is one person versus one person, for example, you have one person in the self-driving car and you're potentially going to hurt one other person, I think that the car should opt to save its passenger over the life of somebody outside the vehicle if it is 1-to-1. I also believe that it should take into consideration, is there an option to harm instead of kill? So namely, yes, it should possibly opt to save the life of the passenger over the life of somebody that it could potentially hurt outside of the vehicle. If there's an option where the passenger is injured or there's less of a risk of fatality, then it should opt for that and spare the life of the pedestrian or the other car.
So this question is great because it brings up the whole AI or a computer deciding what's moral or what's ethical based on really what the programmer views as moral and ethical. If the programmer works for a company and that company is the one who sold the car, then maybe that company goes, you know what, our clients, our customers are buying these cars for $80,000 a piece. We need to make sure that they are protected, that they feel safe, that they know that their lives and the lives of their loved ones are priority number one. So maybe to them, they'll tell that car, you know what, you keep the occupants of this vehicle safe no matter what. So maybe it runs into that group of school children. I think most people would say, well, you know what, the whole Spock thing, the need of the many is better than the need of the few. I think I misquoted that, but it's close enough. So most people would say, well, you know what, yeah, the car should swerve off into the building and kill the driver and save all the kids. Now, I'd like to think that, there's more options than that, just that. I'd like to say, okay, well, you know what? Maybe there's a third, fourth, fifth, sixth option. And hopefully the car would see all that. Can you swerve into the opposite lane of traffic because there's nobody over there and miss the school kids and the building? Can you just kind of sideswipe and scrape the side of the building and not kill anybody? I think it's a great question, too, because there was a study done, and they said the safest seat in a car is the one behind the driver, because most of the time in an accident, the driver will swerve to save themselves just from basic reflex. So, with that in mind, would a human driver make the decision to kill themselves versus killing the kids? Or would they try their darndest to just not hit as many kids as possible and keep themselves from harm? That's a great question. Like the second example with, do you choose the elderly couple? Do you choose the child? Most people would say, well, the elderly couple, they've lived longer. The child's, has a full life to live. But then, well, there's two people there, and this is I don't even know if I can make that decision. I don't even know if I could sit there and go, you know what, this is the morally or this is the ethical way to handle this. This is the decision. And so to expect a computer or a programmer who's working for profit for a company to make these decisions, I don't know. And I think I don't know if there's an answer yet. I don't know if there ever will be an answer for that, because it's a tough question. And when you make those things so black and white without human emotion and human thought and reaction involved, I just think I think it's a dangerous place to be.
There's a famous thought experiment that many psychologists and philosophers have been using to probe at those intuitions that people have about what they think is the morally right thing to do. And it's called the trolley problem. It goes like this. There's a runaway trolley barreling down the railroad tracks. Ahead on the tracks, there are 5 people tied up and unable to move. The trolley is headed straight for them. You are standing some distance off in the train yard next to a lever. If you pull this lever, the trolley will switch to a different set of tracks. However, you notice that there is one person on the side track, so you have 2 options. Number 1, you do nothing and the trolley kills the 5 people on the main track. Or number 2, you pull the lever, thus diverting the trolley onto the side track where it will kill 1 person. What do you think is the most ethical choice? For years, there have been critics that go after the trolley problem because they say it's just not applicable to real-life situations. But now it really is, because our cars will have to potentially make these life-changing or even life-ending decisions. But another way of looking at it is that generals know that some of the men that they put into battle will die, but they need those extra men in order to complete the mission. It's just moral calculus. In a study published in Science, 76% of the people said that it is moral to sacrifice 1 passenger rather than kill 10 pedestrians. So say you're in a truck and the brakes go out, the trucks would swerve to hit a building instead of a crowd of people. Universally, people agree that it's moral to sacrifice the 1. In a study done by MIT researcher Ayad Rawan and his colleagues, they found that most people would prefer cars that would prevent the least amount of deaths. But the most interesting part is that hardly any of those same people would prefer to ride in the vehicles. So we say we want the best for the most amount of people, but we aren't actually willing to do it. And this makes sense because most people do tend to be utilitarians at first, and this is a philosophical theory that in short means the most good for the most amount of people. It sounds great in principle, but a common argument is that utilitarians completely throw out other aspects of moral traits, say like justice, loyalty, honesty. In a University of Idaho paper on this subject, they say that, quote, in classical philosophy, things like virtue, knowledge, wisdom, and temperance are good in and of themselves. In utilitarianism, they're only good if they have a demonstrable utility, otherwise they may be discarded. So intentions don't even matter, it's specifically about the outcome. The other word for utilitarianism has also been called consequentialism, but they basically mean the same thing. In the Stanford Encyclopedia of Consequentialism, they say that another problem for utilitarianism is that it seems to overlook justice and rights. One common illustration is called transplant. Imagine that each of 5 patients in a hospital will die without an organ transplant. The patient in room 1 needs a heart, the patient in room 2 needs a liver, the patient in room 3 needs a kidney, and so on. The patient in room 6 is in the hospital for routine tests. Now luckily for them, not for him, his tissue is completely compatible with the other 5 patients, and a specialist is available to transplant his organs into the other 5. This operation would save their lives while killing the donor. There's no way to save any of the other 5 patients. Also keep that in mind. So is it morally right for them to just take all of the body parts out of the one and put it into the 5? The encyclopedia goes on to say that in classical utilitarianism, they imply that it would not be morally wrong for the doctor to perform the transplant, and even that it would be morally wrong for the doctor not to perform the transplant. Most people find this result abominable. They take this example to show how bad it can be when utilitarians overlook individual rights, such as the unwilling donor's right to life. Now let's get back to the cars. If your brakes go out, would you still want the car that you're in to avoid the crowd of people and sacrifice yourself and your passengers? Is life really just about the numbers, though? Many of us don't want to be selfish, but could anyone really override survival instincts for the quote greater good? I do think some would, but I also think most wouldn't. I know I can't bring myself to say that I would sacrifice, say, my little sister to save 2 people I didn't know. You can call me a moral monster, but I came to that conclusion, and I can't really figure out if it's necessarily right or wrong. I know I'm taking the small risk of that victim being possibly the person who finds a cure for cancer, so of course utilitarians would say I'm wrong, but what do you guys think about that? In our justice system, we see accidents as usually a reaction. Impulsive reactions, like say killing someone because of a car malfunction, holds less weight than deliberately running that person over, obviously. But computers will have to make deliberate decisions. Will that be premeditated homicide if the computer decides seconds before us to kill someone to save 5 versus someone who makes a split decision to kill only 1 person? Wanted to tell you the short story of years ago. I was driving to school and I was driving behind this semi-truck and something had fallen off that truck. To the left of me was an SUV and to the right was this little Corolla. Now luckily I was able to just run over whatever had fallen off the truck, but it did significant damage to my car and honestly I thought it was going to blow up on the side of the road from all the smoke. In that situation, I had just decided that the thing wasn't big enough for me to get hurt, so I decided to run right over it. But what happens if you don't really get that choice? Patrick Lynn, who I was discussing earlier, he's done some thinking on this, and he said that we need to decide if a random reaction is better than a deliberate decision. He gives a scenario almost identical to mine, but he switches it to on the left you have someone with the motorcycle that has a helmet, and then on the right you have someone without, and the object falling off the truck is so big that if you run into it, it will kill you. So should the car swerve to the guy with a helmet because he has a better chance to live? Now keep in mind, this kind of punishes the person for being safe. Should the car sacrifice the passenger? I know I myself am not too keen on this one. Should the car swerve over and hit the guy without the helmet? This kind of just has our cars dealing out street justice, so what should it do? We don't really have answers yet. In real life, people freeze up. I know I did right before I was involved in this accident years ago on the way to a Motley Crue concert. This elderly couple had pulled out in front of me while I was going about 50 miles an hour, and right before I crashed, I slammed on my brakes and literally froze. In a split second when that car was right in front of me, I couldn't do anything but slam into it. I guess I just felt I would survive it, so I just went for it. Turns out I had gotten whiplash, head trauma, and a concussion, and it was kind of bad, but life goes on, right? According to Technology Associates, which is a group of engineers and professors who analyze accident data for legal purposes, they say that, quote, after a person becomes aware of a dangerous situation, some time will elapse before he can take evasive or defensive action against it. This time interval, commonly called the reaction time, has been found to be roughly 0.7 seconds for all normal persons, regardless of their background and training. This suggests that the reaction time depends on some basic aspect of the human physiology involving the brain, nervous system, and muscles, which does not vary much from person to person. What this tells us is that we're pretty limited on what we can do when reacting. However, these self-driving cars will have been through billions of simulations, and so they have things like radar that can detect accidents before they even happen. A few months ago, there was this video that surfaced of a Tesla car that had seen an accident before it happened. So what had happened was the car had sent radar underneath the cars in front of it, which had detected a crash seconds before the person was even aware. And the car had sent a signal to the brakes, thus saving the passenger and alerting everyone else on the road of the accident ahead. Like I said, you couldn't even see the accident at all. I suggest you go watch that video because it's truly fascinating. There really aren't many discussions about this happening right now with the public, so I also encourage all of you to think about these questions and send in your thoughts, not just to me, but also to the legislatures as well, because this is going to affect all of us. Overall, I personally think the pros outweigh the cons when it comes to these cars. Every estimate shows that without us crazy humans behind the wheel, we really could save a lot of lives. We could save so much money on medical and insurance bills, we could possibly eliminate road rage and improve traffic efficiency, we can be more productive in our cars. Just imagine what we could do if when we're sitting in our cars we were able to focus on things we actually cared about, like our work or school or whatever it may be. But we really won't know until we try. Now there are some risks, and some risks we may not even know until we actually start using the technology. And a few people have pointed out that a terrorist group could get a hold of this technology and hack the cars, sending them into playgrounds or just, any horrible situation that you could think of, or someone could use a radar jammer that could just jam all of the communications. One other thing to consider is that in America, the transportation industry employs a huge number of people. We really need to think about the massive numbers of unemployment that will occur because of the self-driving vehicles. However, this is a topic I will delve into much more deeply in a future episode. So these things will need serious thought and consideration, but we have to decide as a society, is this something we want or is this something we don't? If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to further this discussion, please go to www.themoraltrigger.com and comment on our blog. You can also become a monthly subscriber to our newsletter. You can give a one-time donation through PayPal. And lastly, you can become a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/themoraltrigger. Through your support, we're able to keep the discussion going and make sure that none of us are silenced.